Hello again, it's Ryan Manfredi with Peer Support. The following is a video I did with Captain Jim Ellis. It involves his journey to get to this point where he is heavily involved with peer support. It includes the many struggles that he's gone through both at work and at home, and it includes some advice for all of us to pay attention to and listen to. He has real life experience with cumulative stress. The video is mostly unedited except for the parts where you can't quite hear my questions on the videotape. I believe his story is way more common than many think, and I think it is important to listen to. The goal here is to illustrate how the cumulative stress of both this job and life in general can have a very strong impact on our lives. I want to thank Jim for having the courage to talk about this, as it is not easy to talk to in any setting. I also encourage you to listen to the whole interview, as it's not much of an interview, it's more of Jim telling us his story. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Captain Jim Ellis. And with that, here's Jim.
All right, my name is Jim Ellis. I'm a captain here of Sac Metro. I'm in the EMS division currently. I've been with Metro for 20 years now, or in a couple weeks, and I was out at 59 before I went into EMS last summer. Spent the majority of my career at 109 and 59.
What did you do before this?
I worked for CDF for 6 seasons. I was a firefighter and then a seasonal engineer. And I worked in a volunteer department. This was all up in Siskiyou County with half the summer in Mendocino County. So I started in 1997 as a volunteer, in 1998 running calls. So got hired here in 04. Yeah. So 26 years now. Yeah, I know, it goes quick. Yeah.
And when did you promote to captain?
2015. Yeah.
And then on days now for what's been 6
Yeah, it's been August, beginning of August, I went on days.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. I was on the hazmat team from 2007 roughly to 2018, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. When I dropped because I realized I didn't want to run that many calls anymore. And I think a lot of that has to do with why I'm sitting here now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm married. I have 4 kids. I've been married for 20 years almost now. Our oldest just turned 14. We've got a 12-year-old, 10-year-old, and a 5-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Full house.
So it is. It's a lot of fun.
Did your wife work?
She used to work as a nurse at Kaiser Morse in the ER. She was there. She was in nursing school when I got hired here, so I think she did 6 or 7 years. And then she stayed at home after we had our second child and has been at home ever since. Yeah.
Okay.
So now she's kind of a homeschool teacher. So it's 2 full-time jobs. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a challenge in and of itself being at a big house, with 9 people. When I first started working there, it was 2006 when I started working there, and I was one of the only Metro employees in the entire battalion. B7 was still considered American River Fire to most of them. Right. Adam Mitchell was in and out of the station. He was upgrading as an engineer at the time, and Jeremy Horde. And between the 3 of us, there were many times that we were the only 3 Metro employees in the entire battalion. So there was a lot of salty people. You had to earn your stripes there back then. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think looking back on it, I knew probably in 2013, 12, 13, 14, that I needed to change. That, I remember sitting at 109C working with one of my favorite crews I've worked with, which was Brian Evers and Chris Nelson and Drew McDonald and I on the truck, and thinking, I need a bid out. I remember Engine 55 firefighter spot was open, and I was thinking, I don't know why, but I need to leave the station. I need to, and had to convince myself not to leave. And shortly thereafter, I got promoted to engineer, and then I got promoted to captain. And both times when I got promoted, I ended up going back to 109, and I'd been there for quite a while at the time, and when I started working at 109, I was in my 20s with no kids, and by the time I promoted to captain, I'm in my 30s with 3 kids, and you're just up all night, right? With little 3 kids in 4 years. Our kids didn't sleep well at home. We thought the first kid was messed up, the second kid was messed up. By the third kid, we realized we were messed up. We just couldn't get them to sleep, and so I wasn't sleeping anywhere, and that took its toll. It wasn't until years later when I looked back on it and realized that I was thinking about some of these same things, all that time ago. But maybe 7, 8 years later when it dawned on me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you promoted and they sent you right back to 109.
Yeah.
Were you on the hazmat or on the engine?
On the engine.
Oh, so
Yeah.
sleep.
I was only on the hazmat for, maybe a couple years out of the entire time I was there. Most of the time was on the engine. Yeah.
Was it more call volume, or were you having? I assume you were having calls too that were.
Yeah, it was a little bit of everything, right? You go through this career and you just get a barrage of, the volume of calls.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of calls, right? I have specific calls. I remember being a new father. In fact, the engineer I was working with was also a new father. We had kids that were, a month apart, and we're on a pediatric CPR, and I have a 3-month-old, and he's got a 2-month-old. And this little one's got the same name as his son, and so those stick out in your mind, right? That's one of those calls that it's not the baby itself, it's the mom and the dad,
Right.
that you can't unsee and you can't unhear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
After a call like that, what did you guys typically do afterwards?
And we got back in the engine and went back to the station and tried to go back to bed. Said, "How are you doing?" "Doing good. Let's go." And I don't know how many more calls we ran that night. I remember it being a blur, but yeah, that was the. And the captain I worked with was great. I mean, we did check in on each other, but it wasn't anything like what we're trying to do now,
Yeah.
and what I see people doing now. We just didn't have the culture, at the time. Yeah.
Did you go home? Would you go home and talk to your wife about it?
Yeah, I did. I remember. We've always had a pretty good relationship with talking about stuff.
Yeah.
She's always been my rock, the one I talk to about everything. For a long time I thought it was enough, being able to talk to her about stuff. But there's definitely things that I didn't want to burden her with, and there were things that she didn't have the answer to. Even though her dad was a firefighter, she did some seasonal work with CDF, and she was an emergency room nurse.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she had a lot of experience dealing with crap that we do.
Yeah.
And in our personal lives, she's gone through arguably more than I have because of some of the stuff that we've gone through together. As a pregnant woman, they have to deal with a lot more.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, it wasn't probably not enough. It was a help when I eventually did reach out and go to counseling. Yeah.
And when was that?
That wasn't until 2022. So
It's almost 9 years.
yeah, yeah.
It's a long time to hang on to stuff.
It is. In fact, when I try to think about my story, what it is that led me to this spot, trying to help other people, sitting here with you, like, my stuff goes back before I got hired with Metro, and equally as much of my issues have to do with my personal life as they do with these calls like the pediatric, CPR. We all get those,
Mm-hmm.
right? We all have stuff that you don't necessarily deal with the right way, or you don't deal with,
Yeah.
After I got promoted to captain, I bounced around a little bit of time at 42, and then I went to 111, and sometime after I got off probation as a captain, they moved me out to 59, and I didn't want to be out there. You know, as a firefighter, I never wanted to work out there. I did a little bit of time and had fun with it, but it wasn't like when I got hired with Metro Fire. I'd done all this time with CDF. I'd done all this time in a small town. I wanted to be in a big city. You know, run a lot of calls. I was very proud of being busy, and it was like full circle. And I realized when I went to 111 how much better of a husband and father I was. You know, my wife would never tell me to work somewhere or not work somewhere. But she did notice instantly how much nicer I was, you know, how much more receptive I was with sleep. And we talked about it. And then I remember at 59, you know, I had been there for, I don't know, 8 months or so, and I saw an opportunity to leave. And I went, I think one time I went to 58 for a few months. One time I went to 109 for a few months. I'd never not worked at 109 when I had the opportunity to, and there was a spot opening up. And so I asked to get moved over there so I could go kind of try it out as a captain. And the first set I was back, I remember going home and my wife looking at me like something was wrong. And she didn't say anything. And in the back of my mind, I knew, you know, same things were happening. Over the next few weeks, it was very apparent. You know, we talked about it. Like I was just right back into the same person that was not sleeping, bringing home a little bit extra anger, drinking more. You know, not the best father that I could be. And so I did it for 2 or 3 months and went, yeah, I got to go back. And so it was a couple years of me kind of bouncing between some different stations before I finally settled in on wanting to work at 59, knowing that it was the best thing for me, for my home, for my personal health, you know. So that was probably 2017 or so, when, you know, 2017, 18, when I went, I need to work there, work on myself, to be there for home, you know. Yeah. Yeah, it did. It helped for quite a while. I wasn't running the calls, right? At one point later in my career, I realized it's not that call that did it to me, it's all of the calls. I have an easier time responding to what I would consider like a real emergency and dealing with it in that moment than just going on a basic medical aid, because the volume is caught up with me in some aspects. So, you know, a few years of doing that, I think when COVID hit, you know, it changed everything for everybody. And I got a new perspective on a lot of stuff, you know, and I remember thinking I wasn't going to have a job anymore during that time period. And for my own life choices and our families. So I think that coincided with, you know, there was a lot of catch up that happened in 2020, 2021, that, you know, about 2022 was when I hit my lowest point, you know, thinking, I can't do this. I don't know how I'm going to do this for, at that point, 6, 7 more years, you know, or whatever it was. And, you know, like, I just didn't know if I could keep coming back to work, if I was going to have a job, if, you know, I was going to have to get vaccinated, those types of things, you know. So I don't know if it was 2021 or 2022, but I remember, like, thinking, I'm going to call in sick this week. I'm not going to make it through this set. I need to take this set off. And then just going to work, going, no, I'm going to do one more week. I'll call in next week, you know. And getting through that set, going into that 4-day, and just trying to convince myself, go back for one more week, you know. And eventually I did call in sick for a set. And as soon as I did, it was like, I got to go back to work. I'd show up at the station, open the app, you know, or open the gate, and like, I should have waited one more week. It wasn't enough, you know. And I was distancing myself from my crew, my friends. You know, it was, I was just not happy at work. So, yeah.
Sounds like it was just a culmination of.
Yeah, was a culmination of a lot of things, you know, like not just that, like there was, there were a lot of personal life things, tragedies, stuff like that happened that accumulated over time that I didn't deal with, right? And so I'm just talking about work right now, but you know, in 2003, my brother died. I got hired here in 2004, you know. The 1-year anniversary of my brother's death, he drowned kayaking, and we were doing swiftwater rescue in the academy. So, you know, it was, you know, I was one of 2 children, and so dealing with, you know, my brother's death, which happened in May, and I started back with CDF, like basically the same time period it happened, and it was in the county where I work, so I knew people that were on the call, and people I went to paramedic school with were the ones that ran the call. You know, my cousin, some of my best friends were with him, and so learning how to deal with that trauma, or not deal with it during that time period. And you fast forward to January, a few months later, I'm in the academy, and or February, and so then you come out and you're on probation, and now a couple of years have gone by, and I'm dealing with metro life, right? Our oldest child was supposed to die in utero, and you know, this is the parallel lives we live. This is what I found, right? We come to work and we have our life here at work, and we think everything that happens to us happens at the station or happens on a call. And there's so many things that happen in our personal life that we carry that baggage around too, and it all overflows at some point. You know, in 2009, we found out our daughter had some issues, and so she was being monitored about every 3 to 4 weeks while my wife was pregnant. And thankfully, those issues were nothing other than just give her extra monitoring. But at sometime between 25 and 28 weeks pregnant, she had my wife had a couple syncopal episodes while at work, and you know, back-to-back days. We took her to L&D and found out that our daughter had this thing called fetal hydrops, which was, she was given, they told us, you have 2 choices. You can go home and let nature take its course and she'll die, or you can check yourself into L&D, do 24-hour fetal heart monitoring, and when she goes into heart failure, we'll do emergency C-section, intubate her, do bilateral chest tubes, and if she can survive for 48 hours, she's got a 10% chance at survival. And so that was our life. We moved into the ER, or into the L&D. My wife was there for 28 days, you know, and I'm working at 109 and trying to be a young firefighter, doing the right thing by work and her. And I was taking some time off, but going there and staying with her. Other times I'd come back to work. It just depended on how things were going. You know, at one point, they couldn't figure out what was wrong with our daughter. It was 99.9% of the time it's either a genetic issue or a viral infection, and it was neither. All the testing they'd done, and they gave us this 25 million in 1 chance of survival, or 1 in 25 million. And this perinate had this brilliant guess, and she ended up doing a thoracentesis on my daughter in utero. And I sat and watched this thing where she stuck this needle into my wife's chest and into my daughter's chest, or through my wife's belly into my daughter's chest, and pulled out 17 cc's of fluid from my daughter's chest. And I watched her lungs expand, and then, you know, they tested the fluid, and she figured out what was wrong with it, which was this rare issue with babies. But what happened was it allowed my daughter to start fighting this off on her own. And so I'm going back to work, and I get a phone call at one point while I'm at 109 that is a perinate said, "Hey, your wife's amniotic sac fluid levels are too much. if they get any more, she's basically in danger of amniotic sac rupture. And if that happens, we're going to lose both. So you're going to need to come here, and we probably need to make a choice on ending your daughter, you know. So those are the life decisions that you carry around that you face, you know, and you go, like, I still can't even process how to try to make that decision. Thankfully, we didn't, you know, we made the decision. I mean, there was no decision to be made, but it was something that's still hard, you know. My daughter's alive today. Yeah, they did. They helped me tremendously, you know. Yeah, Chris Holbrook was our VC at the time and made sure that everybody up the chain knew that whatever we needed to ensure that I could be there, you know, happened. You know, so I did get a lot of support, but it was, you know, challenging, right? So you carry that stuff around, and you look at everything differently, right? One of the things that I've learned through all this, I felt like empathy was an asset, you know, to having gone through, and there's other instances where you have build up this ability to have some empathy with people and use it on calls, you know, and I thought that was a great asset, to allow myself to attach to people, you know, to make their horrible experience a little bit better. And those are all the calls that I carry around now. You know, it's not so much the little baby, right? It's calling the mom to tell her that her daughter hung herself, you know. It's every time that you attach yourself to somebody. And I never did anything to help myself in those, you know. I just thought I was helping them. Yeah. Well, I said I was at 59 distancing myself from people. And I remember when Jeff Wells started pushing peer support out, right, and really growing this, and seeing your name and Ryan Poulis's name, you know, Crawford, and some of these people, and I'm like, I could never talk to them. Like I worked with Ryan. He was my example, Ryan Poulis, right? I'm never going to talk to Ryan Poulis. And
you know how many times I've heard that?
I know. I know how many times I've said that, back then and now, right? And two people, well, technically three, helped get me to this point. One of them was a really good friend of mine. He saw me, he pulled me aside at 59 and started talking to me and telling me about, he's not involved in peer support, and he started telling me about his issues, his personal life issues, and what he did to get help. And he gave me the EAP phone number. And we talked for a couple hours, right? And just him and I, you know, and we've worked together. He was on that call actually with me with the pediatric, you know. And I sat and I stared at that phone number for like 8 months. And I couldn't call it, right? But I had a name, I'd figured it all out, and then Ryan Poulis called me out of the blue. This was probably, I'd had the phone number for like 6 months, I'm sure. And he said somebody reached out to him through peer support and said, hey, I think Ellis is struggling, you know. And so Ryan helped me. And being able to talk with Ryan and understand just how much people care here, right? Between a good friend of mine understanding that I was hurting and somebody else having the wherewithal to call somebody and say, hey, I don't know how to help him, can you? You know? And so Ryan introduced me to how peer support can work. And as much as I love all the time that I had at with a therapist, I feel like I get so much more out of being able to help each other. Being able to be like Ryan was, talk to somebody. He use the stuff that I've gone through. Maybe it's not me, maybe it's somebody else, right? And he's gone through a lot of crap, and we've all have self-inflicted stuff. It's what you do with it, right, going forward. And that's kind of why I'm sitting here now, is because people like those two showed me how to own your own faults and your own issues, and how to use them to maybe help somebody else's life a little better. That's what we do, right? We go on these medical aids and help people make life decisions, and sometimes we get to actually help somebody, and so a lot of times it's not in just a protocol. A lot of times we help people in other ways that are more important to their life. And I've always taken pride in being able to do that. And so for me, I said 26 years I've been doing this. I don't get an adrenaline rush anymore going on calls. I don't, get excited about helping the public. I like it when we get to, but what I want to do is I want to give back to the fire service. I want to be able to help our people in any way I can. If that means helping them get through 26 years, or 1 year, whatever it is. So that's how I got to here. Yeah. It was interesting. It was very difficult. I mean, like I said, I sat and stared at the phone number for like 8 months before I finally made the call. And it wasn't until, talk about owning it, right? I'm not proud of this, but I remember sitting at one night after a medical aid. The medic had transported, and I'm at the top of this hill thinking, I just need some freaking time off. Like, why can't I be somebody who's got 3 or 4 months off work? I just need to go away for a little while, right? I didn't want to get hurt. I don't want anything like that. But I remember thinking, can I crash this engine into that tree right there, down at the bottom of the driveway, and like just get some time off, And I sat there for like 20, 30 minutes at the top of the driveway, just debating it. And I went back to the station, and I was in like full panic attack. It was like 2 in the morning. Feel like I'm having chest pain. Can't sleep. I couldn't even get out of the engine. And so the next day I called. I woke up and thought, I can't do this. I'm going to hurt somebody else, So I called that number. And ironically, the first person I called was a random name that I got, and said that she couldn't help me. I felt rejected by a therapist because I had just gone through the EAP, because I went backwards through this whole thing. I picked a name of somebody who worked close to my house. And she messaged me back and said, I'm not the therapist for you. Let me give you a different name. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe I got rejected by a freaking therapist. And so I ended up calling that other person, and that's who I still see today. And turns out she's a, 522 or a, peer support vetted clinician, Jill Guff, and so if I had done this the normal way, which would be like reach out to you or something like that, like not the normal, there's nothing normal, but if I had gone through peer support, I would have got a list of vetted clinicians, and I would have got the right one right off the bat. So the EAP is great, but when you're just going down a list of names, you have no idea. Yeah. So it was much easier to actually call her at that point. Yeah. So. I'm doing much better. I still go check in. I feel I'm at a good place where I feel like I can talk about myself, where I can help other people. You know, not everybody will understand. I know that. Shoot, I was one of those guys that never bought into this. There's a lot of them out there, but it works. You know, I think going to days has helped me tremendously. You know, I needed to get away from the firehouse for a while. I needed some change. You know, it wasn't about being slower. It was just about needing a different perspective, a new direction. And thankfully, in an organization our size, we have so much opportunity. Yeah. You know, you can be slower, busier, you know, go truck, engine, whatever. We do have these day assignments that help, you know. Yeah. So, yeah. And now I'm, you know, trying to be as active as I can with peer support and help you, help all of you, you know. Yeah. Yeah, don't be afraid to talk, you know. Find those people that you trust and talk to them. Find somebody on the peer support team that you can talk to. You know, go to the Firestrong website and you can just look right down the roster. There's a ton of people. You know, pick somebody you know, or pick somebody you respect and cold call them and talk to them. But I would just say don't hold it in, right? Find a way to get everything, personal life and job related, just out from in front of your mind. Find a way to put it in the back of your mind, you know, and be able to move forward because, you know, there's so many things, they come back to you. You know, I, somewhere along the way, like I don't think about my story and I'm so jumbled when I talk about it, but when I was working for CDF, there was a plane crash I responded to, 2 air tankers that collided in midair. And we were the first engine on this fire. So I was the initial IC as a 23-year-old kid. And I had passed off incident command, and this was a little bit later into the fire when the tankers collided. And I remember we were doing structure protection, and I was standing kind of up on this hill just off from this house, getting a view of the fire coming down towards us. And I'm watching the firefighters who are literally brand new. Their first fire they've ever been on. They've been in with us for 2 weeks at this point. And they're throwing firewood away from the house. And I hear this large metal grinding noise. And I look up and I see this giant fireball. And you hear the air traffic. And all this happens at one time. And it's just chaos. And you know, our crew spent the next 4 days pulling those planes off the mountain, and you know the CDF crews were the ones who cut the planes up and brought them back to Ukiah and pieced them together. And I was on that incident, and at the time it didn't bother me, right? I thought I could handle this type of stuff. And I was in the hangar on a Thursday in Ukiah, Thursday I think, and piecing together the plane. And I remember picking up a gauge, right, this giant gauge, and it was full of mud. And I wiped the mud, and it wasn't mud; it was flesh. And thinking, oh my gosh, that guy. There was a half a helmet, like it was a pretty, you know, the propeller had gone through the cockpit of this one. And we left that hangar to go on a strike team and went up to Humboldt County. And then we left Humboldt County and we went over to Butte County, and we were there, and September 11th hit on fire. And so my dealing with the trauma from that one never happened because September 11th happened. Right. And I was sitting with my 2 little kids, maybe 3 little kids, years later. Like that was 2001. So this had to be, you know, 2016, 17, somewhere around there, watching the movie Planes, Fire, and Rescue. You know, if you've got little kids, you probably know. And there on the wall is their wall of heroes, and there's the 2 planes. And I broke down crying with my kids. So clearly, there's trauma that builds up through your life that you don't deal with. I've never dealt with it. I've talked to, my therapist, things like that. I talk about it to use it as a story for something that bothers you, you don't know about. That was like 16 years later. Yeah. So don't let that stuff sit and settle on you. You got all these things that happen in your life, and so my advice is to talk. Find a way to not hide it. Yeah.